There are towns in America where everyone knows your name, where the diner on the corner has served the same apple pie recipe since 1962, where children ride their bicycles down unpaved roads until the fireflies tell them it is time to go home. Kellyville, Oklahoma was one of those towns. A quiet stretch of Creek County land, population just over 1,000 souls, where neighbors left their doors unlocked, and the biggest controversy of any given year might be whether the high school football team would finally make it past the regional semifinals. But on a gray November morning in 2004, something cracked open inside that quiet something that no amount of small-town warmth could seal back together. A young woman named Cynthia Dawn Burger, 28 years old, the mother of 2 children under the age of 5, did not come home. Her pickup truck was found sitting on the side of County Road 241, engine cold, keys missing, no signs of struggle visible to the naked eye. Her 2 young children, a 4-year-old girl and a 2-year-old boy, were discovered alone inside that truck, doors unlocked, sitting in silence in a way that no child that age should ever have to sit, as though they had already learned in some wordless and terrible way that waiting was all they had left to do. The question that would haunt Creek County for the better part of 2 decades was not simply what happened to Cynthia Dawn Burger on that cold November morning. The question, the one that deputies whispered in hallways, that family members turned over in their minds at 3 in the morning, that a prosecutor would eventually stand before a jury and speak aloud, was this: how does a woman vanish from a county road in broad morning light, leaving her children behind? And why did the person who should have been most desperate to find her never once seem to be looking? To understand what happened to Cynthia Burger, you first have to understand Kellyville. It sits in the low, rolling prairie of Creek County, about 30 miles southwest of Tulsa, a town that exists between the pace of rural life and the gravitational pull of the city. The land there is red clay and scrub oak, cut through by 2-lane state highways that stretch toward the horizon in every direction. In November, those highways are lined with bare-branched trees that reach upward like open hands, and the sky above them sits low and the color of old pewter. It is beautiful in the way that isolated places are beautiful, vast and quiet, and utterly indifferent to the human dramas played out beneath it. The town itself is the kind of place where the gas station doubles as a gathering point, where the church parking lots fill up on Sunday mornings with the same trucks that fill up the diner lot on Monday afternoons. There is a single elementary school, a volunteer fire department, and a post office that doubles as an unofficial news exchange. The socio-economic landscape of Kellyville in 2004 was working class and proud of it. People who built things with their hands, who drove considerable distances to reach employment in Tulsa or Sapulpa, who measured their lives in seasons and relationships, and the slow accumulation of dignity that comes from honest labor. Cynthia Dawn Burger had grown up in exactly that tradition. Born in 1976, she was a Creek County girl through and through, dark-haired, brown-eyed, possessed of the kind of quiet warmth that people describe when they say someone made you feel seen. Those who knew her said she had a laugh that arrived before her words did, loud and unguarded, the laugh of a woman who had not yet learned to apologize for taking up space in a room. She worked part-time at a local retail outlet in Sapulpa and had, by the fall of 2004, begun making inquiries about completing her GED, a fact that her mother, Barbara, would later describe to investigators with a particular kind of pride. The pride of a woman who knew her daughter was reaching toward something. She was married. Her husband was a man we will refer to throughout this account by the name he was known to the community, Danny Burger, 31 years old in 2004, a laborer with inconsistent employment, a man described by some who knew the couple as charming in public settings and difficult in private ones. They had 2 children together, a daughter, Madison, born in 2000, and a son, Tyler, born in 2002. By the fall of 2004, those who moved in the couple's circle had begun to observe, in that careful way that small-town people observe things they are not ready to say aloud, that the marriage was under considerable strain. The morning of November 9, 2004, began like many November mornings in that part of Oklahoma, cold enough for a jacket, the sky overcast, the bare fields holding a faint shimmer of overnight frost that would burn away by mid-morning. Cynthia had been seen the previous evening at the home of her mother, Barbara, where she had dropped off a casserole dish and stayed for approximately 45 minutes. Neighbors would later recall that she seemed her usual self, relaxed, talking about the children, mentioning that Madison had learned to write her own name at preschool. She had left Barbara's house around 7:15 in the evening, and as far as anyone could confirm, arrived home shortly afterward. The following morning, November 9th, Danny Burger would later tell investigators, Cynthia had expressed an intention to drive to a nearby town on an errand of unspecified nature. He stated that she had loaded the 2 children into her white Chevrolet pickup truck, a 1997 model with a dented rear panel that had been dented since the previous spring, and departed the family's rented home on the rural property off Hickory Road at approximately 8:45 in the morning. He said he had waved from the porch. He said he had gone back inside. He said he had not spoken to her again. Clears throat. At approximately 11:20 in the morning, a passing motorist on County Road 241 observed a white Chevrolet pickup truck parked on the shoulder of the road, slightly askew, as though it had been pulled over quickly or with some urgency. The motorist slowed. He noticed 2 small children visible through the windshield, sitting in the cab. He pulled over. He walked to the truck and found the doors unlocked. The children dressed but without coats in spite of the morning cold, Tyler asleep in his car seat, Madison sitting with her hands folded in her lap, staring straight ahead. The motorist, a man named Gerald Watkins who delivered propane for a local supplier, asked Madison where her mother was. Madison, 4 years old, said only, "Mama went that way." She pointed toward the tree line at the edge of the road. Gerald Watkins called the Creek County Sheriff's Office at 11:22. Deputies arrived within 14 minutes. The truck was examined at the scene. The keys were not in the ignition. A single child's sippy cup lay on the floorboard. Cynthia Burger's purse, a brown canvas bag she carried everywhere, according to her mother, was not present. Her cell phone was not present. There were no signs of a physical altercation inside the vehicle. There was no blood, no torn fabric, no evidence of any kind of struggle that could be immediately identified. The truck had been parked, engine off, in a location approximately 6.2 miles from the Burger residence. The swing hung still. The toy truck lay on its side on the floorboard of the cab. A small pink sock had slipped off Tyler's foot and lay on the seat beside him. These details, small, ordinary, heartbreaking, would become part of the case record. Deputies began an immediate search of the area. The tree line that Madison had pointed toward was a stand of post oak and blackjack, roughly 40 yards from the road's edge, the undergrowth dense with dried autumn vegetation. They found nothing in that first search. No footprints were identifiable in the hard-packed red clay of the roadside. No items belonging to Cynthia Burger were recovered from the immediate area. Danny Burger was notified at approximately 12:30 in the afternoon. He was at home when deputies arrived. Those present at the time noted that he received the news with what they would describe in their reports, in the measured language of law enforcement documentation, as limited visible distress. He did not ask how his children were. He asked how long they had been out there. The silence after that question, in that small living room on Hickory Road, was the first crack in what would become a very long fracture. The Creek County Sheriff's Office mobilized a full search operation by early afternoon on November 9, 2004. By 2 o'clock, there were more than 40 searchers moving through the tree line and adjacent fields on either side of County Road 241. Local volunteers joined the effort before sunset, men and women in work boots and hunting gear, following a grid pattern established by the lead deputies, calling Cynthia's name into the cold air. The Kellyville Volunteer Fire Department lent equipment. A tracking team with trained dogs was brought in from Sapulpa. The dogs picked up a scent trail that moved from the passenger side of the parked truck into the tree line, approximately 23 yards, before losing it at the edge of a drainage culvert. What this meant, whether Cynthia had walked willingly, whether she had been guided, whether she had been trying to reach something or escape something, could not be determined from the trail alone. The culvert led to a wider drainage ditch that eventually connected with a series of farm roads. There were tire tracks in the softer earth near the ditch. Those tracks could not be matched to a specific vehicle with the investigative technology available at the time. By the end of the first day, Cynthia Burger had not been found. The media presence arrived on the second day. A Tulsa television station sent a reporter and cameraman. The coverage was modest at first. A missing person case in Creek County, a young mother, 2 small children, but it was enough to bring additional volunteers and, crucially, additional public attention. Barbara, Cynthia's mother, gave a brief statement in front of the sheriff's office building, her voice steady in the particular way that grief sometimes produces steadiness, the way a person becomes very calm when they have not yet fully understood what is happening to them. She asked anyone with information to come forward. She said her daughter was a good mother. She said the children needed to come home. Danny Burger did not stand beside her. He gave a separate statement from the porch of his home to a different reporter. He said he was cooperating fully with investigators. He said he trusted law enforcement. He expressed what he described as his belief that Cynthia would be found. Those who watched him on the evening news that night, neighbors, former classmates, the propane delivery man Gerald Watkins, who had found the children and could not stop thinking about the way Madison had sat with her hands folded, noticed something in the delivery of those words. Not their absence of feeling exactly. Something different. Something more like the performance of feeling, assembled from the correct components but arriving slightly off-tempo, like a song played in the right key but the wrong rhythm. Deputies whispered quietly among themselves about the odometer reading on Cynthia's truck. Danny Burger had stated, during his initial interview conducted on the afternoon of November 9th, that Cynthia had left the house at approximately 8:45 that morning headed for a nearby town. He had indicated the destination as being roughly 12 to 15 miles distant, a town he named as the location of a store she had intended to visit. But County Road 241, where the truck was found, was 6.2 miles from the Burger residence. It was not on the route between the Burger home and the town Danny had named. It was, in fact, in the opposite direction. The odometer reading on the truck showed a distance traveled that morning consistent with a short trip, not a trip to the destination Danny had described, but a trip to the road where the truck was found and little else. Investigators noted this. They noted it in their reports with the careful precision that good law enforcement documentation employs, and they began to look more carefully at the timeline Danny Burger had provided. He had told a neighbor in passing on the morning of November 9th that Cynthia had left around 9. He had told the first responding deputy that she had left maybe 8:45. He had told the lead investigator, Detective Sergeant Franklin Ruiz of the Creek County Sheriff's Office, that he believed she had left sometime before 9. The range of the departure time, across 3 separate conversations in the first several hours, shifted by a range that, on a 6-mile road, amounted to a significant variable. Clears throat. Sergeant Ruiz, a 17-year veteran of Creek County law enforcement who had spent 6 of those years working cases that extended into the gray territory of domestic circumstances, began to document these discrepancies without announcing them. His investigative notes from the first week of the case, which would later be reviewed as part of the case's eventual reopening, included the following observation, written in the precise shorthand of a man who had learned to write what he saw without yet committing to what he thought. Subject's timeline inconsistent across 3 interviews. Mileage does not support stated destination. Subject has not inquired about children's welfare beyond initial notification. Monitor. The children had been placed with Barbara, Cynthia's mother, almost immediately. This had been accomplished with Danny's agreement, framed as a practical accommodation given the ongoing investigation. What was not framed as anything, what simply existed as a fact that those close to the family began to hold in their minds, was that Danny Burger had not visited the children in the first 5 days after Cynthia's disappearance. The search expanded. Creek County authorities coordinated with the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation, which deployed additional resources including aerial observation. The drainage ditch system connected to a broader network of rural waterways that were searched over a period of 3 weeks. Cadaver-trained dogs were brought in during the second week. A diving team examined a stock pond within a mile of the county road. Nothing was found. Cynthia Burger's purse, her cell phone, and Cynthia Burger herself remained absent. Physical evidence from the truck had been processed by the State Crime Laboratory in Edmond. The results, returned after approximately 3 weeks, yielded nothing that advanced the investigation in an immediate sense. There were fingerprints belonging to family members. There was trace material consistent with normal vehicle use. There was nothing that pointed directly toward a specific individual or event. Those who knew Danny said he seemed, through those weeks, remarkably composed. He returned to a pattern of normal activity faster than those around him thought natural. He was seen at the Kellyville gas station twice in the week following Cynthia's disappearance, buying coffee, chatting with the attendant in a manner that struck the attendant, who would later repeat this to investigators, as like nothing was wrong, like he was just having a regular morning. A regular morning, while his wife was missing, while 2 children under the age of 5 were living at their grandmother's house, while 40 people were searching drainage ditches in the November cold with his wife's name on their lips. There are moments in investigations when the accumulation of small observations reaches a kind of critical mass, when the individual pieces, each explicable in isolation, each possibly the result of personality or coping style or human strangeness, begin to assemble themselves into a shape that investigators recognize. Detective Sergeant Ruiz had reached that critical mass by the end of November 2004. He had requested permission to conduct a more formal interview with Danny Burger, one that would address the timeline discrepancies and the mileage question directly. That interview was conducted on December 3, 2004. It lasted 2 hours and 40 minutes. Danny Burger arrived with an attorney. The investigation did not produce an arrest. The case did not produce a prosecution. By the spring of 2005, with no body recovered, no crime scene established, No direct physical evidence linking any individual to Cynthia's disappearance. And with Dawn Burger having maintained consistent denials through legal counsel, the active phase of the Creek County investigation entered what law enforcement classifications describe as a cold phase. The file remained open. The case was not closed. But the daily resources, the active search operations, the regular witness interviews, these wound down. Life, in the way that life does regardless of justice, moved forward. Cynthia Burger was not found. The question of what happened to her on County Road 241 on the morning of November 9, 2004, settled into the silence of an unanswered case, joining the dozens of such silences that exist in law enforcement archives across every county in every state, waiting. The file sat on a shelf. Outside, the Oklahoma wind moved through the bare branch tree line on County Road 241, and the swing in Barbara's backyard hung still, and the question hung with it. Time does not stop for cold cases. This is one of the most difficult truths about them, not the dramatic truth of injustice, though that is present, but the quieter truth that life continues accumulating while answers do not. The days stack into months. The months arrange themselves into years. Children grow. People move. The particular texture of a community's grief, which is acute and present in the immediate aftermath of a loss, softens over time into something more diffuse, a general awareness, an unspoken understanding between those who remember that something terrible happened and no one was made to answer for it. By 2006, Dawn Burger had relocated. He had left Kellyville and the surrounding area, taking with him a renewed legal arrangement regarding the children that had been the subject of considerable private anguish for Barbara and her family. The specifics of those arrangements and the legal proceedings that accompanied them were part of the private record of the family's ongoing suffering, a suffering that did not make the news, that existed only in the spaces between official documentation, in the phone calls Barbara made to the Creek County Sheriff's Office every few months to ask if there was anything new, in the answers she received, polite and regretful and always the same. Those who have ever loved someone who disappeared without explanation, without a body, without a verdict, without the formal societal acknowledgement of a funeral and a gravestone, understand something particular about that kind of grief. It is grief without edges. Grief with a door that remains theoretically open, because the absence of a body means the absence of certainty, means that the mind, in its most desperate moments, can still construct scenarios in which the person simply left, simply walked away, simply exists somewhere else, unknown and unreachable, but alive. The mind does this not because it believes it, but because it cannot fully abandon it. It is one of the cruelest features of unresolved cases. Barbara did not have that particular mercy, not precisely. She knew what she knew, in the way that mothers know things without being able to articulate the evidence. She knew her daughter had not walked away. She knew her daughter had not chosen to leave Madison's hands folded in her lap in a cold truck on a county road. She knew. But knowing without proof is its own specific weight, and she carried that weight through the years, through Madison starting school, through Tyler learning to read, through the seasons on the Oklahoma plains cycling past in their indifferent succession. Madison, who had been 4 years old on the morning of November 9, 2004, grew up carrying something that those around her could observe but not fully name. She was described by teachers as a quiet child, attentive, careful. Those who worked with her in her early school years noted that she drew, frequently, with particular intensity, not the chaotic, joyful drawing of children released from boredom, but the deliberate drawing of a child working something out. Her grandmother Barbara kept many of those drawings. They tended, Those close to her noted gently to feature a specific recurring image. A woman standing near a road, small figures in the distance, a tree line at the edge of the frame. Clears throat. Small children encode what they cannot articulate. This is well understood in the developmental literature, and it is understood by those who work with children in the aftermath of trauma, that a child who has no language for what they experienced will find other languages, will write it in their drawings and their nightmares, and the particular way they become still when something in their environment triggers the wordless memory of the original moment. Madison could not tell investigators in 2004 what she had seen. She was 4 years old and she said only that her mother went that way, pointing toward the trees. But she had been there. Whatever had happened on County Road 241 that morning had happened while Madison was present, or had begun while she was present, and what a 4-year-old holds in her body and her developing mind does not simply dissolve with the passage of time. The marriage between Danny Burger and a woman he had begun a relationship with after relocating ended within 3 years. Those who moved in his orbit during the years following Cynthia's disappearance described him in consistently contradictory terms: charming, then distant, generous in company, then controlling in private. There were accounts, gathered later by investigators when the case was eventually reopened, of behavioral patterns that traced a consistent shape across multiple relationships. The accounts were familiar to anyone trained to recognize them. They pointed not toward a man who was simply difficult, but toward a man who repeated, in new settings, what he had established in old ones. The Creek County case file received periodic review. Sergeant Franklin Ruiz, who had retired in 2009, had taken a copy of his original investigative notes with him, not in any improper sense, but in the way that certain investigators carry their unresolved cases beyond their professional lives, as a kind of personal obligation to the record. He maintained contact with Barbara. He answered her calls. He told her each time what was true, that there was nothing new, but that the case had not been forgotten. "I want her to know," he said in a subsequent interview, "that somebody still looked at that file and still thought about that road and still thought about those children in that truck." For those who have ever doubted someone they love, who have carried a suspicion they could not prove, who have sat with the terrible weight of believing the unspeakable about a person they once trusted, the years of that cold case represent something particular. They represent the period in which the truth exists, but has not yet been spoken into the formal record, in which it lives only in the accumulated observations of the people who were there, who noticed what they noticed, who said to each other in careful, private conversations what they could not say publicly. The truth was there. It had been there since November of 2004. It simply had not yet found the form that the law requires. In 2019, Oklahoma enacted an updated set of provisions related to cold case review that directed additional resources toward cases involving missing persons, where domestic circumstances had been identified as a significant investigative factor. Creek County, as part of this initiative, designated a cold case review coordinator and began a systematic re-examination of cases that had remained unresolved for more than a decade. The file of Cynthia Dawn Burger, case number CR 2004-847, was placed on the review list in the spring of 2020. By that point, Madison Burger was 19 years old. Tyler was 18. And somewhere in the drawer of a desk that had moved with her through 3 different apartments over the course of 15 years, there was a drawing, a woman standing near a road, small figures, a tree line, that Madison had made when she was 7 years old and could not stop seeing something she had no words to describe. She was about to find the words. The formal reopening of the Cynthia Dawn Burger case was initiated on March 14, 2021, by the Creek County Sheriff's Office in coordination with the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation's Cold Case Unit. The triggering event was not a dramatic single revelation, but rather a convergence. The kind of convergence that cold case investigators learn over years of this work to recognize as distinct from coincidence. It began with Madison. By the spring of 2020, Madison Burger was 19 and living in Tulsa, working at a medical billing company and attending community college part-time. She had grown into someone who carried her history with a careful, deliberate composure, the composure of a person who has done significant internal work on something significant. She had, according to those who knew her during this period, begun speaking more openly in the preceding year about the circumstances of her mother's disappearance, first in private, then in a conversation with her grandmother Barbara, and eventually in a call to the Creek County Sheriff's Office in the summer of 2020. What Madison communicated in that call, and what she subsequently committed to in a formal recorded statement taken in September of 2020, was something she said she had always held in her memory but had not until recently understood the significance of. She was 4 years old on November 9, 2004. 4-year-olds do not have the cognitive framework to process what they observe through the lens of criminality or intent. They observe. They store. And sometimes, decades later, the stored observation surfaces in a context that finally provides it with meaning. Madison stated in her September 2020 interview the following: that on the morning of the disappearance, she had not been asleep when events occurred. That she had observed, from her position in the back seat of the truck, her father's vehicle, a blue Ford, which she remembered clearly because she had always associated that truck with a particular Pine air freshener, parked on the same stretch of road ahead of them. That she had observed her parents speaking outside of the vehicles. That she had observed her mother walking with her father toward the trees. That she had then waited, alone with her sleeping brother, for a period of time she could not quantify as a child but which had felt, in the way that waiting always feels to children, very long. That her father had returned to the road without her mother. That he had looked at her through the window. That he had then walked back to his blue Ford and driven away. She said in the recorded statement, "I always knew something was wrong. I just didn't have a word for it for a long time. I thought maybe I had dreamed it, but I didn't. I know I didn't." Clears throat. The OSBI Cold Case Unit, led by Special Agent Denise Calloway, began an immediate and intensive review of the case record in light of Madison's statement. Agent Calloway had 22 years of investigative experience, 11 of them specifically in cases involving missing persons with domestic elements. She described the Burger file, in a subsequent account of the investigation's reopening, as one that had been exceptionally well documented at the initial stage, citing Sergeant Ruiz's original notes as providing a foundational framework that the cold case review could build upon directly. The blue Ford that Madison had described was verified through records obtained from the Oklahoma Department of Motor Vehicles covering the period in question. Danny Burger had, in fact, been in possession of a 1999 Ford F-150, registered in his name, in November of 2004. This vehicle had never been mentioned in his initial statements to investigators in 2004. He had not volunteered its location on the morning of November 9th. When interviewed by the first responding deputies on November 9th, he had stated only that he had remained at home after Cynthia left. No one, in the original investigation, had asked him specifically about the Ford's odometer reading or its location that morning. Agent Calloway obtained historical cell tower records, which had been collected and preserved as part of the original investigation, but not fully analyzed given the technological limitations of 2004 and the early cold period. Those records, reviewed with updated analytical methodology, placed Danny Burger's cell phone, a prepaid device registered to him, in a location consistent with the area of County Road 241, between approximately 9:15 and 9:50 on the morning of November 9, 2004. He had said he was at home. The cell tower record said he was on or near the road where his wife's truck was found. A new witness also emerged from the renewed investigation. A woman named Carol Dietz, who had lived on a property adjacent to the County Road 241 area in 2004, came forward after reading a social media post about the case's reopening. She stated that on the morning of November 9, 2004, she had observed from her kitchen window a blue pickup truck parked briefly on County Road 241, and a man walking from the direction of the tree line toward that truck. She had not reported this in 2004, she explained, because she had not connected it to the missing persons report, which she had not heard about until several days after the incident, by which time she had not thought to revisit the observation. She described the man as wearing a dark jacket. She described his gait as purposeful, unhurried. She said he walked like someone who was finished with something, not in a rush, just done. The case had now assembled what investigators and prosecutors describe as a constellation of corroborating elements. A child witness whose account, taken at age 19, was consistent with the physical evidence. Cell tower records contradicting the suspect's stated location. A disinterested neighbor witness whose observation matched the timeline. And a documented, established pattern of behavioral inconsistencies in Danny Burger's original statements that had been preserved in Sergeant Ruiz's meticulous notes. Cynthia Burger's remains were located on April 7, 2021, during a targeted search directed by information developed through the reopened investigation. The location was in a rural area of Creek County, approximately 4 miles from the County Road 241 site, in a section of wooded land that had not been searched in the original 2004 operation. The discovery was made by OSBI cadaver teams following updated search parameters. Forensic examination of the remains, conducted by the State Medical Examiner's Office over a period of several weeks, ultimately yielded findings that were sufficient to support a determination of the cause and manner that aligned with what investigators had suspected. The arrest of Danny Burger occurred on June 22, 2021. He was taken into custody at a residence in Muskogee County, where he had been living for the previous several years. The arrest was conducted by a joint team of OSBI agents and Creek County Sheriff's deputies, 6 officers in total, arriving in the early morning hours, presenting the warrant at the front door. Those present at the time of the arrest stated that Danny Burger, when the warrant was read, said very little. He did not express confusion. He did not ask what it was about. He looked at the lead officer for a moment and then said, in a voice described as quiet and flat, "I wondered when you were coming." He was booked into Creek County Detention Center on the morning of June 22, 2021. 16 years, 7 months, and 13 days after Cynthia Dawn Burger's truck had been found on the side of a county road with her children inside it. The news spread through Kellyville with the particular velocity that significant news travels in small communities. Through the gas station, through the diner, through the church parking lots and the volunteer fire department and the elementary school, where Madison had once sat quietly in class working something out in her drawings. Reactions were, in the way of all such revelations, divided by the precise lines of who had believed what through all the years of silence. Those who had always known, or had always felt they knew, experienced the arrest with a complex mixture of relief and grief renewed. Barbara Hendricks, Cynthia's mother, 71 years old by the summer of 2021, received the news from a call placed by Agent Calloway herself. She said, in the brief statement she provided to a Tulsa television station shortly afterward, that she had waited 17 years to hear what she was hearing, and that she did not have words for it, and that she wanted people to know that her daughter was a person, not a case number, and that the only thing she had ever wanted was for someone to be held to account. Others, fewer in number, but present, expressed disbelief. Danny Burger had maintained, across all the years of the cold case, a circle of acquaintances who had accepted his version of events, who had perhaps found it easier or more comfortable to do so, who now were required to reconcile what they had believed with what the state of Oklahoma was prepared to demonstrate in a court of law. Clear's throat. Danny Burger entered a formal plea in Creek County District Court in the fall of 2021. The proceedings that followed extended through the early months of 2022, involving the full weight of the evidentiary record assembled across 17 years. The original investigative notes of Sergeant Franklin Ruiz, the cell tower analysis, the testimony of Carol Dietz, the forensic findings from the recovered remains, and the recorded statement of Madison Burger, now 21 years old, who sat in a room with investigators and told them, in a clear and measured voice, what she had seen from the back seat of her mother's truck on a cold November morning when she was 4 years old. Madison testified at the proceeding. She entered the courtroom wearing a dark blue dress. She took her seat at the designated position, folded her hands in her lap, precisely, in a gesture that those who knew the case recognized as an echo of what the propane delivery man Gerald Watkins had described when he found her in that truck all those years ago, and she told the truth. She told it without drama and without collapse. She told it in the careful, thorough, complete way of someone who has been carrying it for a very long time, and is finally setting it down somewhere it will be held properly. The jury deliberated for 11 hours. Danny Burger was found guilty in the spring of 2022. He was sentenced to life in the custody of the Oklahoma Department of Corrections. He was led from the courtroom in the quiet, final way that such moments unfold. No dramatic outburst, no last declaration, simply the administrative conclusion of a process set in motion on a county road nearly 2 decades earlier. Agent Calloway, speaking outside the courthouse afterward, addressed the reporters briefly. She said, "This case is a reminder that physical evidence degrades but human memory is resilient. It is a reminder that children see things, and that when they grow up and find the language, we have an obligation to listen." She did not say anything more than that. She walked back inside. The Oklahoma wind moved through the trees along the Tulsa road, and the late spring sky was the pale, clear blue of a season that had finally, after a long, cold wait, arrived. Barbara was there. She sat on the courthouse steps for a few minutes after the verdict, alone with the particular quiet of a conclusion that does not feel like an ending because it cannot restore what was lost. Her daughter had been 28 years old. Madison and Tyler had grown up without her. 17 years of Tuesday mornings and Thanksgiving dinners and first days of school and graduations had passed without her. A verdict could not address those absences. It could not return any of it. What it could do, what it did, was speak the truth into the official record and leave it there, permanent and retrievable, for as long as records are kept. The case of Cynthia Dawn Burger is, among everything else it is, a case about the endurance of observation, About the 4-year-old child who sat with her hands folded in a cold truck on a November road and encoded, in the wordless way of very young children, what she had seen, and who carried that encoded truth through 15 years of drawings and nightmares and quiet, careful growth, until she had language enough and safety enough and courage enough to say it aloud into a recording device and mean it. It is a case about the meticulous documentation of a detective who knew, in 2004, that something was wrong, and who wrote that knowledge down in careful, neutral language and preserved it through his retirement and into the years of review that followed. It is a case about a neighbor who looked out her kitchen window on an ordinary morning and saw a man walking like someone who was finished with something, and who eventually found the context to understand what she had seen. It is also, for those who work in missing persons investigation and those who study the circumstances that produce these cases, a case about the particular vulnerability of women in domestic situations where the private truth and the public presentation exist in severe conflict. Cynthia Burger was surrounded by people who cared about her. She had a mother who called the sheriff's office for 17 years. She had neighbors and community members who knew something was wrong within hours of her disappearance. She had investigators who documented their suspicions with precision. And yet the formal apparatus of justice required more time, more technology, more corroboration, and the passage of 17 years before it could act. For those who work these cases, for the families waiting in the particular limbo of unresolved loss, the Burger case carries one irreducible message. The evidence does not expire. The memory of a child does not expire. The documented observations of a careful investigator do not expire. Time changes what is possible, but it does not always change it in the direction of concealment. Sometimes time provides what the original moment could not: the maturity of a witness, the development of analytical technology, the willingness of someone who had not yet spoken to finally speak. Cynthia Dawn Burger was 28 years old. She had a laugh that arrived before her words. She was learning to reach for something. Her daughter carries her forward in the particular way that daughters carry their mothers, in gestures and in strength, and in the decision when it mattered most to tell the truth. She is not forgotten. Music rises slowly, low strings, then broader, then settling. Justice, when it finally arrives after a long silence, does not arrive loudly. It arrives the way the morning does on a cold Oklahoma plain, slowly, incrementally, until the light is simply there and the darkness is simply not, and what remains is the clear, permanent record of what was true all along.